Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to episode 362 of the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. Check them out at PerformBetter.com. I'm your host, Anthony Renner. The show notes are located at ContinueFit.com or StrengthCoachPodcast.com. On the StrengthCoach.com and MBSC.TV Coach's Corner, spoke with Coach Boyle about some improvements he's trying to make in his interval training, some of the improvements he's made, and what he attributes to those improvements. How strong does he want his college-bound athletes to be, and how does he approach some of the things that maybe not under his philosophy, but knowing his athletes are going to have to test out for some of those things. Going to talk about incorporating eccentrics with a new toy that he has, and his take on fascia and mobility. For the AG1 by Athletic Greens, hit the gym with the Strength Coach segment. Today I have on Captain Matt Hibler. He's a former D1 grad assistant. He went from kind of this idea of being a strength coach with some really top guys at Mizzou. He became a police officer, and then he enlisted in the Army and became an Army Ranger. So he wrote an ebook that Dan John actually wrote the foreword to, called Answering the Call, Proper Physical Training for Police and Military in the 21st Century. So we're going to go over what exactly tactical training is. I mean, I always hear that and I always want to know what exactly, how are they training differently and what are they doing? We're going to talk about just this idea about training for selection, or training like what selection is, and then this idea about maintenance for both police and military. Maybe where we've gone wrong with some of this training. I asked him why he put energy system development first within his book. We're going to get his take on strength training for this population and so much more. All right, for the Naamly Maximizing the Member Experience with Sumit Seth, founder of Naamly. Today, Sumi's going to tell a story about two salesmen with two different mindsets and how having a positive mindset can lead to opportunities. I always love that story, and Sumi's going to talk all about how we can apply it in our business. All right, Perform Better online sale right now, 50% off a bunch of stuff, including bumper plates, kettlebells, dumbbells. Check it all out at PerformBetter.com. The last summit's coming up in Providence, August 25th to 27th. You can still get the hotel discount. It ends August 4th, so you got to hurry. Coach Boyle will be speaking at Providence, as long as it's always the big one for Perform Better. It's obviously their hometown gig, so always a great show in Providence. Now look, if you're having some financial trouble, call Perform Better, let them know your situation, and they'll work something out with you. Their motto is they don't want to turn anyone away. Their mission is to get trainers educated as best as possible. Don't let cost hold you back. They'll work something out with you. Try to do what you can to get to Providence. Check it all out at PerformBetter.com. Lots of things to get to, so let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the StrengthCoach.com and MBSC.TV Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. You can try StrengthCoach.com out for 7 days for free. Totally new format, user-friendly, same great forum. As always, go to StrengthCoach.com for your 7-day free trial. Coach, how you doing?
I am doing great, Ian. How are you?
All right. Let's start with just some different social media posts. I just wanted to kind of really just get your, kind of expand. I know we talk about zone 2 and cardio stuff, but this stuff changes with you as you go and you're learning more and you put more emphasis on stuff. But I will say, you posted on Twitter your 3-month comparison with your 4x1 mile. Talk to me about the recovery is most notably, and there's some better times in there too, plus better recovery. What do you attribute that to?
One, I attribute it to riding with a 29-year-old, so that's the good thing. So when you ride, Joe has been really good about riding with me, and it's good for him. It's kind of, they talk about that accountability partner idea, but when you know you've got somebody that you're going to ride with, at least usually in a good week, we get one really hard interval workout like that one, and then one really easy zone 2 workout. And in both cases, in the hard interval workout, it kind of pushes me to do it because I'm with Joe and he's a little bit younger. He's a little bit better than me. And then in the long zone 2 workout, he's equally bored with me doing the 30 minutes. So they both work out. But I mean, as far as what do you attribute it to, it's interesting. I would have to say my aerobic system is getting better uh, because the recovery is clear. Like I said, the times were better. And if you've done it, if for people that have done it and you've done it, the times are actually significantly better because a couple of them were 4 seconds a
Yeah.
mile. I mean, if you've been riding, the assault bike or the air dyno, whatever it is, that that's not that easy to do. And then the recoveries, there were big drops in that too. So I think all of that is aerobic, but I think it also establishes the idea that the aerobic system gets better from anaerobic work. And we've had a kind of long running thread. Brent Welsh has been great, but I still can't separate, lactic, alactic. And he was trying to define all the terminology. I feel like I need to go back to school to get comfortable with sort of the overlap of systems and which system you're using. And I wouldn't say it was the zone 2 work because honestly, I haven't done nearly as much of it as I should. I just think it's the consistency of the intervals and having somebody who you can keep saying, hey, let's do one more this week. And now we're probably, I'm going to say we're 5 months into this experiment, if I was guessing. And we really if you look at some of the early ones, I think we did 14 half miles one day and we might have done 6 times 1 mile. And we kept sort of stretching it out and pushing it out and doing a little bit more. And then after a while, I was like, now let's just try find something that we think is hard and go back and do it. So again, we've done calorie rides. We've done sort of the 4 times 4 minute protocol. The great thing about this too is that we can experiment with almost anything that we see from an interval perspective and just think, okay, that becomes our hard workout for the week, as long as it's within reason. I wouldn't even say somewhat reasonable because I don't think doing 100 calories, 75, 50, 25 is reasonable.
Yeah.
It's unreasonable, but it's at least you kind of look at it and think, yeah, I think we can do that.
Yeah. Mike, what about, so you don't attribute any, like, how much zone 2 are you doing at this moment? Again, we haven't talked about it in a while, but.
I would say, honestly, I probably get 1 30-minute one in a week, really.
Wow.
Maybe
Okay.
2 on a week, like if we go up to Plum Island and we go out and just on a regular road bike ride. But I would honestly say, as much as I set out with the goal of doing it, I dislike it so much that I'd almost always opt for something else. If anybody says, oh, let's do this instead, I would do that instead.
Yeah.
Which is really weird because it's theoretically easier, but the demand, and I've said this to a bunch of people when we've got into these online conversations, and it's hard to attribute or properly attribute this stuff, but somebody said it almost has to be boring by nature. If it's not, if I get on there and think I'm going to ride 10 miles for a time and ride 30 minutes, that's not zone 2. It's not boring. You're not looking up and thinking, oh my God, how long have I been on the bike? How much time do I have left? As my heart's creeping up, I'm getting too high. Like these are all the thoughts that you have as you're doing it. It's like, oh God, I'm 140. All right, I got to slow down. Because for me, for whatever reason, 139 stays theoretically at least in that zone 2 area and 140 doesn't. So I'm always looking. And if I don't pay attention, I'll jump right up into the 140s with no problem if I'm not paying attention. What I've taken to doing now, which again, I really don't like to do, is riding with no hands on that day, even when we're using the assault bike, because I find if I use my hands, I can really easily push myself out of that zone 2 category. The flip side of that is that when I'm doing it without my hands, I'm losing my mind even more. So, but you can't have everything.
Yeah, yeah. The only way I could do it indoors is I haven't done it since hockey season. Like I do it on a road bike, no problem. I love it. I'm like, I'll go for an hour, no problem. But I cannot do indoors unless hockey's on.
We talked about bringing bikes to work because the bad part here where I live in Reading is there really isn't a trail. So I feel it, yeah, at 63, I don't always think, yeah, it's probably not a super smart idea to be hopping on the road bike on these more main roads and going for a ride. But Joe had bought a bike that is basically just parked at his house. He said, I don't ride it at all, but I bought it with the idea that I would. And I was thinking, I actually have a couple because I'm one of these, you know me, I'm a yard sale guy. Every time I see a
Yeah.
bike, I buy it. So yeah, we've got a bunch of bikes floating around. We've got
Um,
like up in Plum Island, we have cruiser bikes, which are great. They're the perfect zone 2 vehicle because you have no gears.
yeah.
You can't even make it easy if you want to. But we're thinking about maybe bringing bikes, just leaving them at work because that way, if we want to jump on and do a half hour, it's probably a lot easier to think, okay, we'll just buzz to the end of the cul-de-sac because I think there is a kind of a rail trail type place in Winchester, Woburn.
Yeah. I it's funny, listening really, it depends on who you're listening to at the time, right? You were talking about the Centurion Olympics with Peter Attia talking about it. And it's really that comes from his book, Outlive. I'm listening to that book, and there is a little bit of scared straight in there, right? I mean, you start listening to it and you're thinking, you know what? There's a good piece to it, a really good piece in terms of this is also controllable. Like there are things I can look at, things that I can do. They're going to be hard, like the VO2 max stuff, and the strength training, but they are controllable. So I kind of feel like I'm surprised you haven't done a little bit more just based off of, your some issues that you've had from your heart perspective and then listening to some of this stuff.
You're right, and I should honestly, I, I should. I don't even have an excuse, but I just find that I really, the fact that I'm doing it at all, the fact that I'm getting some 10 miles in, I haven't done 10-mile rides, things like that for years
Yeah.
until the start of this. So I'm looking at, and I haven't done, honestly, I haven't done interval programming, excuse me, of this length. So when I look at the total time of, say, something like 4 times 1 mile, we're going for 20 minutes of intervals. And I haven't done that. I was doing a lot of 10-minute and under stuff. Still really hard. People would struggle to keep up with me for whatever time we were doing it for, but the durations just weren't there. So I at least have been getting more longer duration stuff done.
All right. Um, Coach, let's move to the opposite end, and that is strength. And you posted a picture of the boys doing it was deadlift day, and you were using the mega trap bar. They were doing 385. Marky was in there. Um, Talk to me about where you are right now in terms of like those guys are, they're 18 years old. You could throw a lot at them. What is your goal for them with strength in terms of getting them strong? How strong are you trying to get them?
Um, I would probably, I think I'm helping them from an ego perspective. How strong would I like to get them? I'd like them to be able to put 4 plates on and bang it out for 5 when they go to college, because I think there's something about fitting in on a college team that is about having a little bit of swagger when you get there. So I think when these guys show up for school and they did it that same day, I should have filmed it. A bunch of them did triples with 80 pounds in the chin up. They're benching 225 for 3. They're they're deadlifting, they're getting close to that 4 or 5 mark. I do think when people talk about ego lifting, I don't think ego lifting is necessarily a bad thing in terms of when you show up as a freshman and you're as strong as the juniors, that puts you in a little bit different category versus kids coming in who are, let's say, relatively new to the weight room or aren't very strong, and you're showing your teammates and you're showing your coaches this, hey, I've been doing my work. I've been doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm ready to be here. So I do think a little bit of that kind of basic lift stuff isn't necessarily the worst thing, as long as you're not pursuing it foolishly. And that's why I video it and show it. Those were all good, clean sets. They were all in really good body position. And I think even if there were 20 reps that we had in the video, none of them were bad. There weren't any that you looked and thought, oh, I don't like those reps. Or those reps. Sometimes I'd look, I saw one today on Twitter, and it was just 6 ugly. It was like, oh God, you wanted to turn away because you're thinking there's like a disc is going to come flying out at you somewhere. So yeah, and I think a lot of them probably, who knows? And the other thing I wanted to do is I wanted to be ready for whatever gets thrown at them in college. If you're stronger, it kind of goes back to a lot of the stupid internet stuff. Strong people are harder to kill kind of thing. But if they get a strength coach, let's just say you end up someplace and the guy's a little bit of a meathead, he's going to like you. You're going to fit in. You're going to be his guy. You're going to get a better shake from that guy than you might be. If you showed up and you were worried about deadlifting 135 or 225 or whatever it was, you might not be that guy's favorite guy. But generally, my guys that go to college that are in that group, the strength coach isn't going to be bothering them. He's going to have a lot of other things to worry about besides, he's going to look at those guys and think, I got other guys to coach. I'm not going to chase you around. I'm not going to give you a hard time. So I also think that's part of it. Having had, obviously, now, hundreds and maybe thousands of freshmen show up for college, I realize the value of being overprepared. People would say, what are you guys doing? We went and ran a mile the other day because it's the same thing. I want them to be able to run under a 6-minute mile when they get to school. And a lot of times it's like, well, we don't ever have to run a mile. I said, you don't know that. And if you get there, one of the kids does have to run a 9-minute mile and a half. That's been, he's been told that that's his testing. And he's also been told that the coach puts a lot of emphasis on it. So we're you want to be kind of best foot forward as a freshman and not show up and think, okay, I didn't kind of dot all my I's and cross all my T's. I didn't do all the things that they asked me to do. And now I'm wondering why I'm not getting a fair shake. I look at some people and think, well, if you don't show up ready, you don't get a fair shake. That's your problem.
Also, I think it's going to affect, a lot of those kids. I know if it was me and I'm going in there, I'm going to try to do everything I can to get up those numbers up and look stronger, feel, whatever. And that's probably I'm going to be a little more sore, a little more fatigued, a little more tired. That's going to affect my play when they're first seeing me as well. So by doing that, they don't have to, and they can even dial it down a notch, probably a little bit on some of that stuff.
Exactly. You don't have to do much to look good when you come in and think, okay, I'm going to be at the top of the list here. I'm going to be one of the strongest guys. I mean, our guys will come in. They'll be one of the strongest guys on the team, on a lacrosse team, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Unless there's a couple of real studs who are really good in the weight room. But our guys will all go in as freshmen, and I think you kind of immediately get put in a more respected role because your upperclassmen look at you and think, hey, this kid does his work. This kid does what he's supposed to do.
Yeah, good stuff. Coach, you posted about the wheeler rack, and you're mounting to your rack, and it's a great way to incorporate eccentrics without losing space. How are you using this in your program? Tell us a little bit about the wheeler rack. We'll probably sell a couple, but there's no affiliate here. But
we did. Ken bought a couple for BU already. I think Carlos will sell a bunch. One, Carlos Wheeler is an incredibly nice man, the guy who invented it, and he came up. I gave him a huge amount of credit because he's still mastering English. So he came up the first time with his wife and showed us the product. And I told him, I've loved the idea of the not the K box, because I don't like the box as much because they're sort of freestanding, but either K box or eccentric had made a pulley, like a wall mounted pulley that I thought about, but I don't really have enough wall. And the one thing that I realized is I do have racks, and if I could get these things to mount to the rack, so we're using them. We're trying to get some kind of knee dominant exercise, some sort of row, some sort of rotational core type exercise that we're using them for. So we've used them for a transverse chop. We've used them for a split squat row. And what I think when you start talking about particularly ACL injury prevention, the pull back from the eccentric, from the cone, is really important. The fact that you're going to get an unequal return. So if you pull that thing hard, it's going to pull you back harder. And that's something to me that we were missing in the weight room. The bad part about it is we still haven't been able to incorporate it as much in the 4-day workout as I would like to incorporate it, just because of the way the racks are being used. So what we've ended up doing, actually, and this was Pat Stefanski's idea, we're doing a row on a day that we don't row. So we might be doing chin-ups on one day and then rows on the next. So we're kind of breaking the rule from I wouldn't normally, you wouldn't look and think, oh, they're doing some kind of back exercise or some sort of pulling exercise every day. But we are, because we need to be able to figure out how to incorporate the equipment into the program. And so right now, in some ways, we're fitting the program to the equipment a little more than we might normally do. But I think the other thing that we do, I think we do it as good as anybody, is we're willing to experiment. We're willing to look and think, okay, this is something that we want to try. Okay, how are we going to try it? How are we going to incorporate it? And be able to look, because even with Carlos Villa, we broke a bunch of them in the beginning. We've helped him with some features in terms of, we pulled the ropes out. This because the way he designed it, it wasn't perfect in the first rendition.
Yeah,
and
never is.
Right. And now it is. It's getting consistently better. So that's also good.
Very cool. Coach, I wanted to talk to you. I know with you, a lot of it, we talk about this many times, the logistics of things. And then when there's some new ideas, like let's say when FRC first came out, functional range conditioning, and the boys all went there, the girls all went there, and they basically came back, and it was kind of hard, you felt, to incorporate some of that stuff into your program. But and we've seen this over 16 years, maybe at least 15, with Fascia. Tom Myers first, right? Anatomy trains, and even like a guy like Bill Parisi came out with a book and is incorporating all of his talks around that. You go to things like Greg Rose and Eldoa, Guy Voyers, probably butchering his last name, but his Eldoa program, a lot to do with fascia. Stick mobility, Dennis Dumpy. I mean, incorporating a lot of this idea of what is happening at the fascia. By the way, I went to stick mobility and lecture at Perform Better, as well as the Greg Rose one, and they were both fantastic. Greg Rose obviously is always really good, highly recommended. Where are you on I feel like this is a change. Greg Rose always has a way of making things applicable, practical to their situation. Like he said, you don't need 40 exercises; you need the 2 right ones, right? So I felt like it wasn't overwhelming It's still super hard to coach, not super hard, but it's still coaching intensive. Let's call it that. Where are you on all of this? Do you feel happy with where you are from a mobility perspective, or are you always looking from that perspective to change and see what's new?
We're always looking. I think it's Guy Voyer, because I believe.
Yeah.
I think it is. But you should know that. Come on.
I know. I really should. I just Guy Lafleur, and then
watch the Canadians. But so I think, and I said this to Danny Foley, because Danny's also been going really heavy in on the
yes.
Yeah. So I said, Danny, I look at it's further reinforcement, because I looked at, when I saw Myers' stuff, I thought, wow, you talk about spiral lines and things like that from his book. I think it reinforced what we were already doing. We're doing so much unilateral stuff where we're reaching with the opposite hand. There are things that we're doing that are working on those fascial connections. I've been talking about fascial connections for a really long time without knowing it. So we would talk kind of the subsystems and say to somebody, hey, the reason we're doing this unilateral exercise is because we're taking that kind of deep longitudinal subsystem, and then we're going through your thoracolumbar fascia. We're going into your opposite side lat. You look at Myers' book, and I think he calls that maybe the spiral line. I forget, but there's a front and back spiral line. So you start looking at the, chopping and lifting and diagonal patterning. I think we've been maybe functional training and fascial training are probably inextricably linked, but suddenly we're realizing in a greater degree why this makes sense. We're looking at this and saying, so for me, it always made sense. I looked at the anatomy and I thought, hey, this stuff's all working together. If I'm using my right upper back musculature, right? They could say right side lat, but it's really not. It's lat, it's teres, it's anything that pulls on my right side. But if I do that and I stand on my right foot, I would always say to people, I don't think that's neurologically correct. I don't think that's the way it's supposed to be done. If I do that and I stand on my left foot, now I'm incorporating rotation. I'm incorporating anti-rotation. I'm incorporating the neuromuscular interrelationships of these muscles in the way in which they work. And I think people have started to look at that and think, hey, that's fascial training. And I look at it and I agree. You're absolutely, I think it is fascial training. And I'm not going to say we were doing it before everybody else because we didn't know necessarily what we were doing. What we were doing, I always would look at it and think we were doing functionally, anatomically correct exercises, which when we look in this sort of big fascial picture ends up making a lot of sense. So when you start thinking about mobility and you start thinking about not isolating and movement stop muscles and all these things, it all kind of interrelates. When you look at, I can remember when we were rolling people's feet and people would be like, how does that work? And I said, well, from a fascial standpoint, you're connected from the bottom of your feet to the top of your skull. And when you manipulate the bottom of your feet, you get a release across your whole body. So we were sort of much like we've always been. We were kind of knocking on the door. We were in the room, bumping around in the dark or whatever it was. But we were in the right place. And I think now we end up more where I look at it and think, hey, we're in the right place still. But there may be some things I may go and listen to Greg and think, there's some stuff here that I hadn't thought about yet. Because Greg is always a really good thinker.
Guide to Wellness Through Stretching.
Wellness Through Stretching. Yep. Guy just sent it to me. Dale Deese just sent it to me. And I like it because it's the same idea. If you look, I was looking at some of the total body stretches and it's some of the stuff that I think we can do some stuff better in terms of incorporating upper and lower body stretches we've been doing. We call it, a band lat stretch where we're just using a band coming off the rack. But the reality is it's not a lat stretch as much as it is a lateral line stretch. And then it's funny how you think about latissimus dorsi. If I knew my Latin better, I'd probably be able to tell you. But there, latissimus relates very strongly to lateral in terms of in that lateral line. And you start playing around trying to get lat stretch. And what you end up doing is getting a stretch that goes down all the way into your oblique, all the way into your quadratus lumborum. And, you can even move that stretch into your hip, depending on how you manipulate your feet. So I think we'll continue to learn more and find out more and realize, hopefully continue to realize that we're on the right track. And then if not, as we've always done, we'll jump on the next track. I said, I'm always right up until the moment I realize I'm wrong. And then I'm right again.
Yeah. Well,
I'm famous for that thought process. People are going to be, he was right. And then he was wrong very briefly. And then he was right again.
But the only thing I see that's not missing, because I'm not up at MBSC, but that FRC was talking about early, Charlie Weingroff was talking about early, Greg and Stick Mobility was talking about in this, is that tension. Where does the tension fit in for you? Because they're talking about creating tension as well through these structures.
Yeah, that's the part I'm not sure about, truthfully.
Okay.
That's the part I don't know. I can't quite, they haven't established for me the necessity yet. That's the difference. In my mind anyway, I haven't looked at that and thought, hey, we have to figure this out. And I had a great, you have to get on the show. You got to put David Gray on your list of people to have on the podcast. If you're not following David Gray Rehab, follow David Gray Rehab, because I've been following his stuff and it's very cool, sort of Gary Gray-esque, fascial-esque. He's a very thoughtful Irish guy. He's got a great accent. He's worth having on just for his accent alone. Must be a Dublin guy because he sounds a lot like Robbie Bork. But he had a couple of young ladies on his podcast. One of them's name was Jill Zimmerman, and I can't think of the other one's name. And one of the things that they talked about, the two of them did the podcast together. St. Clair was the other person's last name, and I still can't think of what her first name is. But one of the things that they said is that you need to explore all of these things, be it PRI, FRC, whatever it is, because then you can decide whether or not you're going to incorporate that. Do you know what I mean? Like when you
Yeah.
look at think, okay, am I going to be able to, or do I want to incorporate this? I guess not am I going to be able to, but do I want to? How do I feel about again, tension or about FRC or about, but I can't, the thing I don't like, and this is what we get with a lot of people, is that they decide they haven't done anything. And then they decide, oh, I haven't looked at that at all. And I don't believe in it. That's a big kind of a common standard in our field.
Yeah.
You hear people, they're bad mouthing things. And you think, well, have you been to a PRI course? Have you read through the manual? Have you talked to anybody that does PRI like with us? And I still remember going back, God, I don't know how many years ago it was, but Kevin Neild and Eric Cressy were talking about PRI, and I thought, I got to find out more about PRI. And that's how I met Michael Mullen. That's how Michael Mullen ended up on the Perform Better tour, because I had Michael come to Woburn and do a couple of in-services. And then I said to Chris, hey, this guy's going to be really interesting for people to listen to, because he's got a little bit of a unique perspective on a system that people want to know more about. So I think you should go in every rabbit hole, even if you don't go deep. You should always go in, whether it's listening to Spina, listening to the FRC, and whether it's listening to the PRI people or whatever it is, whatever the new thing is that's out there, you should probably spend some time at least looking at it before you make a decision that it's not for you.
Yeah. And I think when all of these minds start converging from that perspective, like there's a lot of breathing in these things too, right? So you got the breathing and everybody's incorporating breathing, and these are all smart people. And, Greg Rose has a different twist on that too, which was interesting. But, okay, here's some tension, here's some more, longer stretches, the more consideration about fascia. When all these smart people start thinking, throwing stuff out there like that, there seems to be like, hey,
If you look back, I can tell you, and I know this for a fact, I have said, and I have it, you can find it in one of the functional strength coaches, where I said, I don't think we're stretching muscles at all when we talk about stretching. I said, I do not think we stretch muscles. I think we're manipulating fascia, because I use the chicken breast and the plastic bag analogy a lot in those years.
yeah,
I said, I don't think, because I can remember my guy, Dan Dyrek, who, again, I'm the president of the Dan Dyrek fan club, but
yeah,
saying that, hey, if we stretch muscles, everybody would be really flexible, because muscle's pretty extensible. He said the problem is the wrapping's not. The wrapping is not very extensible at all. So when we're stretching, when we're trying, people like, and this was the David Gray thing, he's talking about trying to get into hip capsules, much of the way that Gary Gray used to kind of talk about trying to get into your glute and get into your hip. And it's all, there's a jumble of good stuff. And what I'm always trying to do is say, okay, what's really in there that's usable, that I can pull out, that can be usable in a place like Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning.
absolutely. All right, Coach, on that note, we'll let you go. Thanks for doing this, and we'll talk to you next time.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
Welcome to Naamly's Maximizing the Member Experience segment. My name is Sumit Seth, and I'm the co-founder of Naamly. In today's session, I wanted to share a story of two salespeople named Alex and Ben. They worked for an established shoe company that decided to expand into a new territory where everyone went barefoot. The news of this peculiar territory left Alex and Ben in awe, but their reactions couldn't have been more different. Alex, upon hearing about the barefoot population, cursed his luck. What a terrible place to be assigned. How can I sell shoes to people who don't even know what shoes are? This is a complete waste of time, he grumbled. He couldn't see any potential and became pessimistic about his chances of making sales in such a peculiar market. On the other hand, Ben, an optimistic and resourceful individual, thanked his lucky stars. Wow! A whole territory filled with potential customers who have never experienced the comfort of any shoes? Oh my God, this is an incredible opportunity. This is a home run. I can't wait to introduce them to the world of shoes and gain this entire market share. I'm going to kill it, he thought, with excitement brimming in his eyes. As they set out on their journeys, Alex's negative mindset clouded his approach to potential customers. He approached people reluctantly, having already assumed that they wouldn't be interested, and he lacked the enthusiasm needed to spark curiosity. Predictably, the responses he received were disinterested, and he struggled to make any sales. Meanwhile, our guy Ben, he took a whole different approach. He saw each barefoot individual as an opportunity to make a positive impact on their lives. He engaged with them warmly, shared stories about the benefits of wearing shoes, the comfort, the protection, the style they could experience. Ben's enthusiasm was contagious, and he managed to spark interest even in those who had never considered wearing shoes before. As days turned into weeks, Ben's positive mindset and genuine passion began to pay off. The word spread like wildfire, and soon people were eager to try on the shoes Ben offered. As more and more people embraced the idea of wearing shoes, Ben's sales flourished, and he established himself as the go-to person for all things footwear. On the other hand, Alex's negative mindset continued to hold him back. He couldn't see beyond the initial challenge and remained stuck in a cycle of self-doubt. The more he focused on the impossibilities, the more they seemed to multiply. In time, the contrast between Alex's struggles and Ben's success became apparent to the company. They realized that the true difference lay not in the market or the customers, but in the minds of their salespeople. This story of Alex and Ben reminds us of the crucial importance, as Todd Durkin would say, get your mind right. With a positive mindset, even the most daunting tasks become conquerable, and we open ourselves up to possibilities we never knew existed. Our perspective shapes our reality. While challenges and opportunities may be similar, it is our approach and mindset that determine the outcome. Remember the statement, opportunity is nowhere, can also be interpreted and read as opportunity is now here. It really comes down to where you focus on splitting the letter in that last word. Nowhere, now here. Such a small difference can create a massive impact. Little hinges move big doors. So embrace any challenge with a positive outlook, enthusiasm, and see them as opportunities for growth and achieve success. Till next time, this is Sumit Seth, co-founder of Naamly. For more info, please check out Naamly.com and schedule a free demo to discover how we simplify in both capturing and depicting little things about your clients and staff so you can have massive success in your business. Use the referral code StrengthCoach to get started on a free 30 days, no strings attached trial.
All right, guys, now it's time for the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment brought to you by AG1 by Athletic Greens. 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens. I use it every day. For me, it fills the gaps in my nutrition. If you listen to the podcast, you know I've been kind of using it as a pre-workout or even in the evening, almost like last thing that I drink, like before, not bed, but like in the evening. And I just feel like sometimes it gives me a little bit of an energy boost. But they're going to give you, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to athleticgreens.com/strengthcoach. All right, today I have an interesting interview for you. We have on Matt Hibler, and Matt is former graduate assistant strength coach at a D1 university. And he decided to pursue his original career plan when he entered college and he became a cop. So he's in law enforcement for 4 years and he wanted to challenge himself further and enlisted in the Army at age 28, which is kind of old, I guess, for it's not old, but it's, in our relatively old for joining the Army. Most people usually start a little younger. But he joined with an Army Ranger contract, and that gave him an opportunity to join the 75th Ranger Regiment, and he was selected to serve at the regiment. He graduated from Ranger School and had 2 combat rotations in Afghanistan. He's still active duty. So, Matt, thanks for doing this, man.
No, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, I did forget part of the reason why we're doing this is Matt's still really into strength and conditioning, and he goes on Dan John's forum, and he was kind of Dan John wanted him to post something, and really that was the impetus to kind of starting a book that he wrote called Answering the Call: Proper Physical Training for Police and Military in the 21st Century. So, Matt, let's just start out, because you and I have been we had a pre-interview and we talked a little bit beforehand, and I just told you I do a lot of Go Ruck stuff, and I think there's this, and it probably pisses all the active duty guys off, or former. It's this idea that we can all train like SEALs or Rangers. It's almost like this idea of getting to our dessert before we have our dinner, and it's this idea of, hey, these are the top guys. Let's just see what they're doing. Let's train like them, and then people get hurt. And it's kind of ridiculous. And I think tactical training has really become this misunderstood. That's why I wanted you to come on and clarify, who are we talking about? Because when I think of it, this is just me being an outsider, is I just really think of military only. But I know that it does involve the police force. It does involve sometimes firemen, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I just think of like guys that go ruck with their rucks on, shooting in open fields, and they're doing push-ups, and that's tactical training. But
Right.
Not really. But let's start out by that. I like to define things so my listeners know where you're coming from. What is tactical training? How would you define it, and who is it really for?
Sure. So just real quick, I just have to, the business side, because you did mention I'm active duty. I just want to make sure everybody knows that all these opinions are my opinions alone and have nothing to do with the DoD or the Army as a whole. So that's just something I have to say as a quick disclaimer.
Absolutely.
So just when I think of tactical strength and conditioning, I know that there's like a certification out there for it and everything, but when I look at it from my perspective and I'm trying to get people moving again, it's essentially going to be the building blocks, like the build the engine piece before we actually go off and do all the things that we're talking about, like you were mentioning, like running around in the field and shooting. So when we look at like the military, when we go in there, right, there's basic training. And then we kind of, if you decide to keep moving on different things, you'll get more and more training on the tactical side when we push that stuff. The stuff I'm trying to hit in the book is going to be the misconceptions, which I think you're touching on, where it's there is a difference between, I think, preparing for a selection. There's a difference between attending selection, and then after all that, there's going to be that whole like maintenance or actually serving in whatever unit you're going to be in. If it's police force, that you're also going to have and this is the kind of the culture I'm trying to the change I'm trying to make here with writing on my Substack and in this book, where we're going to look at, what does it look like when how should it look when you go into the police force? How are we selecting people to get there? One, are we selecting the right people? And then we build them there at the police force, where we start to work on the basics. And we can talk more about how it's set up in the book, and it's not an accident how I put things first, like energy systems and strength and condition and strength, and how we kind of combine that together as we move. So it's, how do we build those people, get them in the academy, which is going to be your basic building blocks of where they're at. And then obviously, once we find the right people, build them properly, then you can add the intensity to it, kind of like what you're talking about there. And then it all kind of comes together with realistic scenario-based training, where we kind of move on forward there. So when I think most people, when they think of tactical training, that's the last piece they're looking at right there, right? Realistic scenario-based training. So for military, that's going to be you're in the woods and you're doing your best that you can possibly do to try and replicate combat, which is hard to do. But if for police, that's going to be your scenario stuff, where you have a guy go in, and some departments are excellent at it, where they actually have full homes that are basically all foam, like it's like a giant pad, but it's built like the inside of a house, and they'll have role players that pretend like it's a domestic violence situation that goes south, and then they go in there and they can actually apply all the things they're learning there, so that when it's real life and you have those things happen, you can actually respond properly.
Very cool. That's a great explanation. And I think it kind of reminded me while you were talking of it, it's kind of like this idea of sports specific training gone bad, right? So I work with golfers, and the whole thing in like 15 years ago, where you saw a lot of people taking a dumbbell and replicating the swing, right?
Right.
And or super heavy bats at a time, right? For baseball or certain things, right? Like that, it's overly specific. It really reminds me, it's very similar. So, and we're going to get into a little bit more of the meat and potatoes, kind of follow the way you wrote the book. I want to see what your thoughts are on those different components. But is it going to be similar to like when we're training a sport? Like I told the woman today, I said, listen, 80% of the stuff we're going to do is similar to, I'm going to do that with, if you came in to lose weight, if you wanted to go into probably, get a little bit more, just look better aesthetically, just regular functional training. And that other 20%, we're going to work on golf specific stuff from your assessment. Is that accurate to say, like, with you, what you're trying to do?
Right. So like right now, I'm helping out a friend of mine who is even joining later in life. He always wanted to join the Army. So he's in his late 30s. He's actually an athletic trainer. So again, another kind of a weird path where he's the guy working on guys when they get hurt and whatnot. He's been doing that for his whole life, and then always in the back of his mind wanted to do military things. Now he's jumping into the National Guard potentially on a special forces contract. So helping him out, it's like I have to now. It's like this thing where you see the way football players train, right? Kind of like what you're hitting at. You see, those are almost easier sports to train in a sense. I know that there's still a ton of skill to it. I saw it. I completely understand that. But when you try and like put on a graph, like what a special forces, a future Green Beret needs to be good at, or what an Army Ranger needs to be good at, it's very hard to plot like what's more important. It's like, well, you're asking them to walk forever with a backpack on. That's great. Okay. So, but then you're also asking them to climb rope. You're also asking them to hop over walls. You're also asking them to carry heavy things. So you add all these different, and that's in selection, right? Like, so that's just that's the job interview to then move on to the next phase of the Q course for an SF guy. For Ranger Regiment, it's going to RASP for 8 weeks, right? So it's not just one athletic event here, right? Like you're sending someone to a school for 8 weeks or a selection, where it's going to be RASP is, unless something's drastically changed, is typically, kind of a little bit more of a beat down in the first month or so. And then once you're kind of still there, it's still a selection, still going there, but there's more training on the back end of it. And when you look at that kind of stuff, right, that's a long time, right? Like 8 weeks, that's a season, that's everything else. And it's not like it's not like you go out on the field before you do everything. It's not like you get a good warm up in, it's not the same thing. So it's like you have to stop and build these people with a very large work capacity, right? And then you run into that danger, just like with any other sport, right? That if you were to do push-ups, let's say you're still doing the old Army PT test where it's push-ups, sit-ups, 2-mile run, and you want to really excel on that. Well, a good way to do that, right, is just to practice the test. We can all do that and get a very high score, but you'll be neglecting so many other things. Well, if you practice push-ups and sit-ups all the time, right, at some point, especially if you're an older guy, you're gonna be like, why is my lower back hurt all the time? Why is my shoulder bothering me? Okay, I'm doing well on the test, but like, what am I really doing here, right? So again, it's going to follow the same pattern of general aerobic-based training with some strength work there. If you're competent enough to do that, right? Build some strength, build some aerobic capacity, so higher volume, all those kinds of things. As you get a little closer and you actually built yourself up, so you got a little bit lower of a resting heart rate. Let's say you're hovering around 50 now. You're looking like you're getting pretty fit. Good. Now we can start working on, now that we've built that base, we can start working on anaerobic thresholds, start to kind of nudge that up a bit as we go there with some threshold runs and things like that, and start to work on getting the rucksack on, walking more, getting used to that, toughening up your feet as you kind of get off and move towards that. Very similar process, I think, for police work as well. If they're actually, and we can get on to this later, but it's like, if there actually is a standard to work towards, right? Unfortunately, there's a lot of departments dropping standards right now to get hired. So when we try and get ready for those standards, it's like, well, you have a police officer. Again, it's that same challenge where, cops don't walk on the football field, throw the ball around a little bit, get warmed up, and then all of a sudden, they blow the whistle and the game starts, right? You're in your car, the heat's on, it's 30 degrees outside, and all of a sudden the guy is running from your traffic stop and you don't even know why. So that's the kind of stuff where in an instant, you have to be switched on and moving. And that's what makes this so challenging, trying to train these people.
Absolutely. And it's funny, interestingly enough, I saw this Simon Sinek video yesterday. You might have seen it, where he was talking about, he went to all the, the SEAL, all the top military, to see how they trained. And one of the things that they were talking about, they drew him a graph and they said, on the vertical axis was this idea of ability, like physical ability and skill ability, let's call it skill. And then the horizontal line was trust, right? And they were talking about, he was talking about, like, look, they would rather pick somebody closer to the trust, right? Somebody you trust, that you want to be with, closer to that line, than higher up on the skill and physical preparation. And I don't know who else I heard say this. If it was like I read so many different SEAL or whatever, right? Saying, look, a lot of times the biggest guys don't always make it, because a lot of times it means they just trained on their own, they got strong and they got really good shape, but they didn't really understand what it was to work with other people. Can you just touch on those? Because to me, that's a very similar thing, like this confidence, this trust in somebody, as opposed to like this, there's somebody who, might be like more of a dictator type leader, like, do this, do that, whatever. But they'd rather have somebody on that other end of the spectrum. And again, they're going to select these guys, or the guys that are going to make it, or the guys that work with their team. Can you touch on how does that fit into this training?
Well, peer evals are a piece of a lot of different things out there. And I think that can be an equalizer in these situations. So I think, my experience would be attending Ranger School, right? So Ranger School, in giant quotes, is a leadership school, and it really is a leadership school. It is, but they also accompany that with some nights you don't sleep at all. There will be periods in the school where you will only eat a couple MREs a day. So that's roughly 2,000 calories a pop for each of those, while also moving with 100 plus pounds of gear nonstop. Like that's the idea. And the whole point of the school is to break you down and then break everybody else down with you. And that's after RAP week. RAP week. So I guess I should just say, so Ranger School, 61 days. The beginning of it is something called RAP week. I think it's Ranger Assessment. I can't remember what it stands for, but it's a week of like all your personal events where you got to you do your land navigation. These are all your single events, your land navigation, if you've seen the balance beam that you go over that's way high up in the air, that thing. Yeah. All these things, these gates you have to hit. And then at the end of it, you have to do the 12-mile ruck, the standard, with, which isn't a hard standard. It's 12 miles in 3 hours with around 40 pounds, but you're sleep deprived and they've been kind of beating on you all week, right? So you do all that stuff and you get through that and you do your individual things. Well, then the next phase is patrolling. And that's the part where you're very sleep deprived. You're in the woods. It's like a terrible camping trip with way too much gear that you didn't need. And that's essentially how it goes. And you're in there and you get these, you'll get missions to go do a raid, and what happens is that you will get placed in leadership roles. So people will hey, this time you're the platoon leader, this time you're the platoon sergeant, you're a squad leader, you're whatever, and they go from there. Those are graded positions, right? And what happens is, and it's an amazing dynamic, right? So you're tired, you're sleepy, you're hungry. Well, when you get put in a leadership role, it's very important to you at that point because you have to pass if you want to keep going and graduate and get your tab, right? And then everybody else at that point isn't being graded. Well, we're humans. And naturally what happens is when you're tired and hungry and everything else, and you literally haven't slept for a couple of days, you start falling asleep. You're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And then as a leader, you have to kind of grab those people and move them when they're actually falling asleep in front of you while you're on the move. Like the things that I could tell you I've seen, it's insane. And people just walking off because they're so tired and they're almost sleeping, standing up, walking into the woods. And so you're in a leadership role trying to move those people around while they're not in a leadership role. So naturally, they're a little bit more switched off. And it's just an interesting dynamic, right? Well, at the end of all that, if you're too much of the other person I just described, not really helping out, the peer evals will be that kind of that leveling out thing at the end, where if you're so bad at the end that everybody peers you out, like that's how you can kind of weed those people out. For what I do in the strength and conditioning book and answering the call and everything, I do touch on some of the psychological pieces for how that can look for a police officer or military at the end there, how to be, I think what it takes to be successful in the selections. And I do touch on that somewhat. I don't get too crazy detailed with military because I think it's extremely important for those selections to be very pure. Obviously you're going to sign non-disclosure agreements and everything else while you do those kinds of things. But with that said, though, if you're a team player and you keep in mind that it's a team of, when it's a team event, it's a team event. When it's an individual event, it's an individual event. That you're going to have these different moments in these things, whether it's RASP or SFAS, Special Forces Assessment Selection versus Ranger Assessment and Selection Program, where things are going to be on you, and then other times you're going to be working together as a team. And then doing that, just being a team. If you're in charge, be in charge. If you're not in charge, don't be in charge. Help that person succeed. Just as if you were in that position, and you're going to be successful if you do that. Like it's really that simple. For police, it's a little bit of a different dynamic, especially depending on what department you're in and how things are set up. Right? If you have a partner, you're going to have people who are going to be when you're in police work, you're going to have people who are going to be working on their own, mostly like on patrol and everything. And you're going to also have times where you're on a SWAT team, right? And you're going to be working together. That's where that dynamic is going to kind of fall in there. So really, it's really dependent on the situation, but teamwork is going to be teamwork no matter what your job is there at that point.
Absolutely. So now the book again is called Answering the Call: Proper Physical Training for Police and Military in the 21st Century. And we have talked about kind of the misconception of some of this stuff already, but let's just go into, look, for every good product, there's a problem that gets solved, right? So you obviously saw a problem here. Where are we going wrong? What's the problem you feel like you're trying to solve with this?
So for military, generally speaking, it's again, you kind of touched on, I think, before we started recording and everything, where it's the idea that every workout has to be this death-defying event, right? There's so many times where people just aren't ready for these things, and they just kind of push and push and push, and they don't take into consideration things like you're doing a ton of training, you're doing all these different things where you're just adding stress on top of stress on top of stress, and they never really seem to get anywhere. That's something I've noticed, especially once I transitioned from a Ranger regiment to the big Army. After I think I told you I had a parachute injury a while back, and which ended up requiring me to get a total hip replacement. And once I made that jump and decided to go a different route in my career, I went to the quote unquote bigger Army, and I got to see how they train outside of Ranger regiment. And it's just different, where people are kind of breaking, there's more of a just kind of break yourself off mentality. That's certainly in Ranger regiment too, especially for younger guys who are going there. But what always seems to happen, and I talk about this in the book, is that there comes a point in everyone's career, usually in their late 20s, where they're like, I'm always in pain. I'm not progressing like I used to, because you know how it is when you're younger. You can just pick up a sandbag and throw it around and you're fit, right? Like you can go for a run and it seems to do what it's supposed to do.
And you have Doritos for post-workout meal, right? It doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's funny because like you said, I joined it almost approaching 30, and guys who were my team leaders at the time, because I joined late, were younger than me. And it was kind of fun seeing them have that mentality where it's like, go, 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 go. And then as I spent more time there, right before I left, most of them had transitioned more to like asking me for like, hey, how are you doing your programming? Because like, I just, I'm getting these shoulder problems and I'm doing, and it's just, again, it never fails. And I've been helping my friends from regiments still, many of them who ended up having surgeries and everything else down the road. They're like, I just can't, how should I start from zero and build myself back up? And it's like, all right, take a breath and let's start, let's take our time here and build back up. And every time these people get back to me and they're like, I progressed more in these past couple months than I have in my entire whatever time period. So again, it's most of the time for that population, it's having them back off because they're just so motivated. Police work. You have police officers who are like in SWAT and everything else that are extremely motivated. They're, most of them, a lot of them are former military, some aren't, but they're very motivated people that are always pushing it, and have that similar piece where you have to kind of teach them to, back off a bit, right? And then there's the other side of police work, that was kind of shocking. When I never forgot my first day in law enforcement. And it's because when I was coming in, I saw two things. I don't remember what order I saw them in, but one, you come from a Division I strength coach, right? You're at the University of Missouri. Your head guy is a guy who just missed the NFL, right? He just didn't get picked up. He played in, I think, the preseason. The guy before him is a very successful power lifter there, is second. And then you got a few other people there who are high-level power lifters, just missed the Olympic weightlifting team. One was on the U.S. karate team, high-level gymnasts, right? You have these very fit people who are very, very impressive that still take care of themselves, right? And then my first day of police work, I see people smoking in the garage, and I'm like, oh my God, and then I walk in and I'm sitting getting ready for shift meeting, and a gentleman walked in, and he was a very big guy. Like, to the point where it was like his flashlight was, and I'm not trying to be mean, but it was almost perpendicular off his belt, like from how big he was. And I'm just like, my God, like anybody at any time could be asked to save someone's life, save your own life, save your team's. It's a job that isn't that physical until it's like the most physical job ever. And that always stuck with me. Obviously, I remember that day very clearly. So there's two dynamics to police work. One is, how do we train our tactical groups, like we kind of talked about? And then two, how do we get those populations that aren't working out at all, especially in these medium-size-ish departments, where they're just not motivated? How do you fit that into the work schedule? How do you get people moving again? So for me, there's a whole section in here about, and it was because I talked to Coach Boyle. I actually sent him an email and I was like, what do you think of this book or these articles I've written? And he's like, it's good. He's like, but you wrote it for a strength coach and some very motivated people. He's like, well, how are the people in police work right now as well? Like, how is the other side of it? And him saying that, I was like, he's got a really good point. So I stopped and I rewrote a whole section of the book where it's like, how do I get people starting just doing healthy habits? Is it just the Dan John thing where do we start with a glass of water in the morning? And once we do that for a week, can we have a healthy breakfast? And then once we do that for a week, can we go for a walk? And then once, building from the body, it's sad to say, but that's where some people are at in the profession. So how do we get those people moving? A lot of that can start, I think, in the academy. And then if the culture is right at the police department, it can continue from there with things like standards, whether it's an annual test or a twice a year test or whatever there.
Yeah. It's funny because I always wondered why they don't have that. And I don't want to stereotype them all.
No.
All the cops, right? Certainly I've got a couple of guys at the gym. I see they're cops. They're awesome shape. Unbelievable. Mm-hmm. But did you think about, I know you have the habits, but what about, is there this idea of losing weight just in general? Like that first step, like getting in shape?
Yes, 100%. Especially depending on where you're starting from. And we're talking about things that it's very relatable just to the general populace as well, right? Like we have a huge problem in this country where so many things could have been, I think, helped along, like whether it's healthcare, whatever. We went through the pandemic, right? Most people, when we got past age, it was bigger people that got really impacted by COVID, right? Having fitter people in general is going to help you just in a normal population. Now, imagine if you're a police officer who's working 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. for years, right? And so we got shift work one, night shift on top of that. You're seeing some of the things you'll see in police work are very hard on the mind, so you're going to see some pretty brutal things occasionally. It really is this holistic approach where I think, just like you all say, movement is medicine. I completely agree with that. It's not just on the joints, but on the mind as well. Like, with just getting that endorphin rush, getting moving again, and just keeping yourself fit is going to set you up so that you can actually handle the stressors of this job. Yeah. The one way I like to usually describe it is, for a foot pursuit, for a police officer, right? Like if you're in the dark and from my own experiences, you're driving, you have an idea that there's a wanted guy in the vehicle. You get behind him, you can tell the vehicle's not stopping right away. Next thing you know, the passenger door flies open and he's off to the races, and he's already got to jump on you because that's just the way this works, right? Like the guy has to jump on you because you have to react to what he does. He's out of the vehicle. It's probably 1 a.m, right? You're jumping out of your car, throwing it into park if you remember to, then you got to hop back in and throw it back in the park. That totally wasn't me. Running into the field, chasing him in the dark, And, because he's got the jump on you, you've got to catch up to him. And you're chasing this guy through a field, over a street, around a corner. It's probably an 800-meter sprint to get this guy into custody, right? So you look through the internet, right? You stop and try and break this down like you're trying to train an athlete. You had a person react on the spot, kind of almost like an agility piece or a linebacker or whatever. You're jumping out of a vehicle, landing on one leg, taking off on a dead sprint with no warm up, and you were probably sitting for God knows how long. And then now you're on a dead sprint wearing around 20, 30 pounds of gear, depending on what your department has you wear, chasing this guy. And then you have to get him into custody, which this guy just tried to hide in the woods. So it didn't turn into a fight, but they have in the past. And people have obviously, chosen to fight. They're sitting on a weapon or whatever. And you end up getting into these like sprint to hand situations while also trying to keep in mind being reasonable with your use of force and everything. It's a lot. And then you get done with it and you're out of breath and you're trying to recover from the stress of that situation, hoping you did everything right because you're on camera, whether someone else filmed you or whatever. It's a lot. And if you're not fit, how do you plan on doing that, especially for 20 years? You're probably not, right? You're probably not going to stay in the career.
Yeah. And another thing we didn't even talk about yet is the respect that cops, especially now, they don't get. And it's emotional and it's depressing. And, we all know we're preaching to the choir here, but how, one of the best cures for depression is movement, is exercise,
Absolutely.
is right. And so, kind of making sure we're feeling better. And the funny thing is, I'm listening to Dr. Peter Attia's book, The Drive, right now. It's about aging, right? I'm sorry, that's his podcast. I'm listening to Outlive, that's his book.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about living longer and it's about starting this process. It doesn't start like, man, I just had this incident. Now, like, I got to start training. No, you really should be training first for a while to prepare emotionally, mentally, physically, for all of these things and for that stress. So let's get into a little bit of the training. It's interesting. We talked earlier. You did have where are you now idea. So that's kind of really where you were talking about with the, the habits and getting somebody just started. But you start with the energy system development and understanding that. For me, it's that big rock idea. If I'm looking at this book, I'm thinking he really thinks this is number one. He wants people to get this going based on his experience. I'm not saying you're downplaying strength training. It's the next chapter. So it's right there. You might say they go hand in hand, but talk to me a little bit about energy system development, why you put it first and how you treat this from a tactical perspective.
Sure. So when I look at this stuff, a book that really was it had a lot of impact on me was Joel Jamison's The Ultimate Guide to MMA Conditioning.
Yeah.
I saw that and I was like, this guy really took a lot of different ideas and broke down the nuts and bolts on how to train these different things. And it's not all just running. It's not all just, the bike. There's some different things in there. And that always kind of stuck with me. And when I decided to enlist in the Army, I was kind of intimidated by doing this, right? I was 28. I was jumping into something. And I was like, well, I read about this guy, Craig Weller. He has a few articles on T Nation and everything, who was specializing in training guys who were going to selections and stuff. So I did some more research on him. He was a former Navy SWIC guy. So he was the dudes who would get on the boats and bring the SEALs to places before he got out. Really cool job. And he was training people, selection hopefuls or whatever. So I reached out to him and he ended up writing my programs for me. And when I saw his stuff, I was like, this guy really took a lot from Joel Jamison, one. And the other side of it too is after I followed some of his things, I was like, man, I'm going to get weak as hell doing this training because I'm doing a lot of energy system stuff. And I'm only in some phases of it, I was only lifting heavy, maybe once a week, twice a week tops. And I was like, man, I'm going to get very weak. And what I found though, by the end of it, when it was all kind of together, I had a resting heart rate, I think in the high 40s. I wasn't like crazy strong, but I was still, about a double, but I think I was doing trap bar deadlift at the time. So about a double body weight trap bar deadlift. I was, strong enough, what I kind of get into in the book as well, and some writing, but I didn't get like weak like I thought was going to happen. And so that was a big moment for me where I was like, I was like, so I can actually do occasional 2-hour movements and still maintain some strength, right? So like, it's not, and why was I able to do all that? So what I think that means is that if you build your work capacity enough, and I think foundationally speaking, aerobic training and things and energy system training is going to help you with that. Obviously, I'm not downplaying strength training. This is what always happens when we try and talk like this, but when it's just that when you look at somebody, let's say they have a resting heart rate over 60, just as a general number, okay, they're probably not just generally fit in general. Like they're not gonna. So if you do a heavy set of squats and you have a resting heart rate over 60, you're probably not going to recover as fast as somebody who has a resting heart rate of 55. And that was just my feeling on it. And so what I found was, and when I work with other people and when I've trained myself and from my own experience of training up for these things, was if I took the time to with good strength training, with good strength programs, which were like, total body lifts and everything a couple times a week, but also combining that with submaximal aerobic work, where it's that 120 to 150 beats per minute zone, which actually, obviously reading Peter Attia, it's a range. We don't really know for sure what that's going to be, but that zone 2 types, that sweet spot, right? Building that, and then building that part where your heart can actually handle the stress of the training. Now you can start to add on that intensity for for whether it's weightlifting or harder conditioning. What I've seen often, and I don't mind it in selection training to put stress on people, but if you in your own training to train up for these things, just jump into the hard energy system training like I talk about in the book, and you haven't built that foundation, well, you've already, you're like trying to put a turbocharger like on a, I'm not a car guy, but it's like you're trying to put this heavy exhaust and turbocharger on a V4 when really you should have stopped and built that V6 or bigger before you started trying to put all the fancy stuff on there like hard lactic training and everything else. So that's why I think it's extremely important. So I'm certainly not downplaying strength training. I think it's extremely important, but there's also in these professions where it's that sweet spot where it's, you're good. Some people can get freakishly strong and get freakishly aerobically fit and run, sub 6-minute miles and also those are very gifted people. Most of the time with the people I've seen, you have to find that middle ground where it's like, okay, you're now strong enough, you hit some pretty good standards. Now let's make sure our energy systems are looking pretty good.
Yeah. And you can, obviously, I mean, the big push right now is, all right, 80% in that zone 2, right? And
Sure.
then, or if you listen to Andy Galpin talk about, like, most of your training should be in that kind of training. Once a week minimum, try to go as hard as you can. And then once a week, find that middle ground. Maybe it's 3 to 4. It's that AT training, right? That kind of building that up a little bit in that zone 3 and zone 4, 3 to 4 minute intervals, right? But that doesn't really kill your strength. It doesn't take that much time, in my opinion. And you could still be strong. I think, kind of like you. I mean, I'm 56, so I won't go heavy every day, obviously, but like today, even I did my heavy deadlifts and did some plyometrics and whatever. Right. So I'm gonna focus on those things. And Peter Attia now is starting to influence me into like, yeah, what are the important things? Because I do feel like, not that I didn't think of that before, but now it's really thinking, yeah, what are my actual goals when I am going to be 100? Do I want to ride my bike? I want to put on a 10-pound ruck and go for a 2-mile walk in the woods, right? Maybe not up Mount Kilimanjaro, but I want to be able to do this stuff on it. I still want to get on my stand-up paddle board, right? I want to get on my bike and go down to the store. So those are some things now that I'm starting to think about. Yeah, if you do want to do some of those things, but it's funny because you do mention a couple of times all these strength coaches, like even a Mark Verstegen, guy like Tim Anderson. You're talking about Dan John. You're really training these people like the everyday athlete too, because that's what this sounds like to me too. We're not going super hard yet. We're not just we're treating them like, hey, you are kind of an athlete, but we're not going to get too crazy. We have to, there's some things we can do along the line, be just strong enough get that aerobic capacity where we want it to be. What about, as you were saying this and telling the story, have you been trying to implement sprinting in this as well?
Yeah. So, one of the methods, like, you talk about like Joel James, he calls it like high resistance intervals, which, I think everybody's been doing something like that since playing Pop Warner football, where, hill sprints, things like that. So yes, depending on where you're at in your fitness, I think if you're a bigger person, I think the bike and stuff, I think the concept of sprinting is extremely important. But I don't know if everyone's ready to run quite yet. So as long as we're going uphill, I think that's good. I think we're pushing a sled. I think that's great. I think if we're even using a bike with high resistance, I think that's great. Just depending again on where you're at. So a guy like me, right? I don't run too often anymore now that I have a bionic hip. It just doesn't, the juice isn't worth the squeeze to me. So a lot of bike stuff, kettlebell swings, things like that I can still work out, hitting the heavy bag, things where you can still get that quote unquote sprint piece to it, where you're moving hard, but not necessarily, pounding pavement. But no, I think sprinting is outstanding. And obviously for a police officer, you're going to have to occasionally.
Yeah. Let's talk about strength training, where you stand on this in terms of, again, because you just said, it's almost like we got to think about the microdosing aspect, right? Where hey, can we get a couple sets in now, like 10 minutes, and then do another one at 12, then do another one at 4. Talk to me about, let's start out with the police, because I think that's been our main focus right now too. Anyway, but let's start out with police, because again, that's going to be the hardest guys to maintain and keep this. Or if somebody is overweight and they do want to say, I need to get into this, but they got these long shifts, how do you start them? How do you progress them? And where do you want to see them? You talk about Dan John standards, so we can talk about that as well.
Okay. So a perfect world scenario, as far as, and this kind of got me some flack when I posted this online, was I brought up a kind of a generalized standard that I thought was reasonable as a minimum hiring standard for a police officer. And looking at Dan John's stuff and seeing, because he works with a lot of, the general populace and everything else, my own experiences working with people and everything else, like, what is a reasonable standard for a person who is trying to become a police officer? And I looked at other standards throughout the country, like NYPD had a various push-up, sit-up thing, and then they had a 1.5 mile run standard. I think they pulled from the Cooper standard at some point, and all these different things. So I looked at it and I was like, all right, so what do we know right now? I'm like, so let's think we want general amount of strength. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. And I'm okay basing it off of body weight, even though there aren't weight classes on the street, obviously. But at the same time, I think if you base some of these standards off of body weight, you're naturally going to select people who are more fit. Because if they're too, so here, I'll just say the standard. So I said just a 1.5 times body weight by 3 trap bar deadlift. As it's just a general body. And I even said you could use the high handles. So and then I said 30% of the body weight 3 times each with a single arm kettlebell or a dumbbell, overhead. So by 3 each arm, 30% of your body weight. And then NYPD recently dropped the standard, unfortunately, but it was a 14:21 mile-and-a-half run. So I figured just have this standard that existed forever for cadets coming in to be police officers in a major metropolitan city. I thought that was a reasonable standard where it's fast enough that you're not going to be, you're certainly not going to make the podium at a track event, but you're not going to be totally out of shape.
What's that, like a 9-minute mile, right? About
it's very slow. Yeah, I swear it's I mean, you could walk and jog it, I think. And then I said, or with, I'm not really sure yet. I said an 800-meter run in full uniform and equipment. So just, you're in your street cop or, your police uniform and you can take off an 800-meter run and do it in 4 minutes or less. So that's obviously an 8-minute mile. So nothing blistering, and you can have all the time in the world to recover afterwards. And man, there were some people that loved it. And then there were some people that told me I was, being discriminatory to bigger people by making it based off of body weight. And I was kind of blown away because, the job is very physical. So I think any physical standard test is going to be somewhat discriminatory, right? If you're out of shape, you're going to be out of shape. Doesn't matter. And this standard, it doesn't matter how much you weigh. If you're 300 pounds and you can hit 150%, 50% body weight deadlift, 30% single arm press, and the 1.5 mile run standard, you're still hireable. There's just going to be very few people that can do that. There might be a few guys in the NFL that can knock that out, but other than that, there's not going to be too many bigger normal people that could knock all that stuff out, right? And so starting from there, perfect world, we actually have a minimum hiring standard so that now you have a population of people who are coming into the academy that are trainable. Like that's the whole point of these standards, right? Like, do they have a base that makes them trainable for when they go there? If they show up at the academy, and I don't care what they look like on their resume and everything, they could be, PhD holding people that will be outstanding police officers. But if in the end they're pushed physically in some way and cannot perform, none of that matters, right? So you're just going to have that base there where you are now trainable. You have that. Now, when they get in the academy, I think that's the time where you can start to build them up, like we've already talked about, where you'll have a general, a block of training where it's going to be mostly intervals combined with maybe a couple of days of typical strength training, where you're going to have complete rest intervals with usually complete rest, I would say. So think about it like a general aerobic based block where you could probably think of sprinting, those kinds of things, where you're going to have 10 to 20 second intervals with recovery, right? Because I want these people to build up to this stuff, right? I don't want them getting too fatigued quite yet. A few days of steady state work. And that doesn't necessarily have to be just everybody going for a jog. I know that is a common go-to because it's just easy to do that with large groups of people. But there's nothing wrong what would be so hard about having a bunch of duffel bags filled with sand or just sandbags or whatever? It could be dirt cheap. It doesn't matter. Just some weighted implements where you have like a circuit that continually goes around in a circle where people keep their heart rates elevated, but they're not like, trying to blow themselves up and make themselves throw up. It's just keep moving for 45 minutes, right? Like, I think that would be just as beneficial, if not more beneficial. And I know compared to jogging, much more beneficial to have them go in there and start to build their aerobic capacity that way. Do that for a while, and then the next phase of that, it could be just as simple as starting to decrease those rest intervals, the rest intervals in between those intervals that you're doing with them, and starting to work on those same circuit training things. Can be different movements, but now we're starting to pick up the pace, starting to push them a little bit more, add a little bit of stress to it, and then if you really need to at the end, you can start blowing them up with more like those lactic power intervals where you're doing some hard 400-meter repeats, 800-meter repeats, things like that. I don't know how you're not going to have a fit academy class coming out from doing that with, I think, very limited equipment. You're not going to have, Olympic athletes coming out of there that are ready to do extremely heavy lifting or anything like that. But you're going to have some generally fit people that can, again, take their training to the street and be just generally fit. And obviously, we haven't even talked about like the actual skill-based training that has to go with that. I'm just talking about strength training so that these people can be ready to do those things well, right? If you're fit, then you can take Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu classes, you can learn boxing and things like that. If you're not fit, how are you going to do those other skill-based things that's going to actually help you do the job, right?
Okay, that's all well and good. Let's say that to me would be the easy part because you could deal with the academy or you can get things passed, right? But you have a harder job here because you're trying to help a lot of these guys who have kind of maybe lost their way.
Right.
How do you reach those guys who, and I told you this was kind of, this is the perception. My wife and I went to Chicago in March, right? We went to a concert and we did a donut tour. And the first place we went to were out because in Chicago, donuts are huge, but there are these little places the size of my closet. Right? And so everybody's we're all outside and it was like 5 degrees out, by the way, Chicago, man, wrong place to be doing donut tour in March. But who pulls up? 2 cops, right? And look, I'm there having a donut. There's nothing wrong with, them having a donut. I'm just saying, like, there's that perception and it kind of things spiral. It's an easy, like, oh, donuts are awesome here. We're on the road. We want to just go in and go out so we can kind of keep doing our job. How do you reach you got a tough job with this.
Right. So like, I'm kind of chuckling because it's like you're like fulfilling every stereotype possible
Yeah.
and just going out. Because I'm assuming those weren't the most fit gentlemen
No, they
going
weren't.
there and doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is challenging, and putting this thing, my writing, like I do on my Substack, which is, I think, is a kind of a newer platform, but I'll write long form on there, right? And it's long term. Like my actual website is longtermtraining.com, and then the Substack is longtermtraining.substack.com. And a lot of that are those kind of like bits and pieces, nuggets for people who are trying to get back on track, not just the book itself, but these articles that are totally free for people. But a lot of what I'll do is, I've looked on different police forums and things like that, and I just see what are people asking, or is there even an interest for certain things? And one example, like just a real world example, was one of the, and it's probably one of the most popular articles I wrote, was some guy was like, look, I'm on a proactive team, so I'm guessing he was in a major metropolitan department, and he was on a proactive, probably gang unit. So that those guys are usually out in small teams, that could be surveillance, jumping out on people who are doing things, long-term stuff, but it's proactive, and it's fast-paced stuff. And, he was describing, he's like, look, I want to be fit. He's like, the guys I'm working with never stop, and we're eating garbage at gas stations, and we're just, because we're always in the car, we're always doing these things, and we're never stopping. And he's like, does anybody have any, what do you all do for your meals? And of course, the majority of the responses were ridiculous. And, because cops are some of the most sarcastic people on the planet, most of them are just joke answers. And finally, what I responded with, I was like, if you have a cooler, this is the simplest thing in the world, like just pack a wheat bread, turkey, avocado sandwich, have that in there, throw something green on it, and just have it ready in your cooler in the car. The thing will be ready to go. It took you 5 minutes to prepare. And it's with you, and that way you got no excuse. It's in the vehicle. You got to have it. I go, if you have a cooler, it could be Greek yogurt, almond butter, some fruit, some kind of veggie. You could almost get like a veggie powder. If you're serious about this, buy a vegetable powder. Have that in the vehicle. It's shelf stable. You can never go wrong with that. Is it a sacrifice? Can you not get your sugar hit from whatever? But have some fruit. Like maybe that'll help you out. I found I think it was grass-fed beef jerky. Like I think it's Archer's brand makes a grass-fed beef jerky. I'm like, have that with you, have some almonds, have some of that vegetable powder with you. Again, shelf stable. It can stay in your bag for months and be fine probably. And then a really fast meal, if you do have a cooler, protein powder, veggie powder, a little bit of kefir, mix that up, have, some kind of, you can even have a probiotic if you can get a hold of one of those things. And then some kind of natural peanut butter or almond butter or something like that, where it's with you. You have a fat source, good protein source. It's filling too. Tuna packets, not ideal, but it's we're kind of getting down the prepper thing here, where I said, if you really have to, tuna packets, almonds, canned vegetables, have that in there. Like that's going to last you forever. It's with you at all times. You can pop it open and eat, and then be done with it. Other than your peers giving you a hard time for that, I think that's going to be your best thing. And then that gentleman reached out directly to me. He's like, that's the best advice I've ever gotten. What else you got for me? These are my workouts. So they do exist. It's just, it's a cultural change right now. And I think I told you, part of what got me writing more about this, not all, it was Dan on Dan John's forum. And he was the one who was like, the stuff you're writing, do you mind if I turn this into an essay for my site? It's really good. And that was really, really nice of him. He gave me a great opportunity, and I really appreciate it for him doing that. And so I kept writing, but really what got me writing was when that Uvalde tragedy happened. There was that school shooting, and the response from the leadership at the time, from the police there, was, they showed up, and instead of going in like you're supposed to on an active shooter like that, they treated it like a barricaded subject, and just kind of stood there when God knows what else was happening during that horrible event. So how does this relate to what we're talking about and this? Well, the culture right now in some places, and not all, there are some fast-paced departments that have some really, really good leadership. But in a lot of places, there's a tendency that mediocre is fine. Don't be you're kind of punished a little bit, I guess, if you're more of a go-getter. And if you are, so it's like, if you're going out there and doing things, you're probably going to get the wrong kind of attention. They kind of want you hanging back and just waiting for the call to come, and then go handle the call, if that makes sense. So if you have that kind of environment where, you're trying to tell people to back off, and you don't want them really, being go-getter, you don't want them really going, you're naturally going to attract people to this kind of work, and you're going to get those people who don't really take care of themselves, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean. So these people are out there that they want stuff, but again, what resources do they have? They got one random dude like me who used to be a strength coach writing on Substack and begging you to read my stuff so you can get some ideas, as compared to you look at it, and I don't blame the situation here. You look at a Division I program or a pro athlete program, right? What do you have? You have dietitians, you have strength coaches, and I get it. There's millions of dollars at stake. I totally understand it.
Yeah.
But we want good police officers. So they got to have some form of that kind of a resource, in my opinion. Strength coach, dietitian, and everything. That should be the direction this profession heads towards, as compared to me just kind of helping out people as they kind of come my way and everything else. So that's how I kind of answer your question.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. You're really essentially talking about the same stuff that we're going to say to general population, except for, obviously when it's coming from somebody who's been on the job, who says, I know you're going to get shit from your buddies. Like,
right.
They're going to be like, oh, you just got to overcome that. But you're 100% right. I mean, even me, like, I'm not the best eater. So I always have to find strategies. Like, if I don't bring like a Quest bar, an apple, raw nuts, a banana to work, and like a little protein powder, like, I will eat whatever garbage is in front of me. I'm guilty of just as anybody else, Especially if I had a couple bourbons the night before, then I'll really be feeling it, So
yeah.
It is one of those things where we could take the same information, apply it to, like you said, hey, you gotta have a cooler because you're going to be doing this, you're going to be doing that. You could still have these things. It doesn't have to be just, well, I have to go to the gas station because everybody else is doing it.
Right.
And again, it's the same stuff that we're talking to everybody else. But let's just talk about this idea, though. Stay on this idea with where else do you do? Like, is it a matter of maybe, and again, I think, you said you're the guy talking about this stuff, but then the problem is there's too much of the barrier for entry of a CrossFit type. That might be good for the guys who are already in shape.
Exactly.
It's not good for the guy who's looking and, he's 40 pounds overweight. He's like, he can't do those stuff. Maybe he never played a sport. And now he's like going to try to do Olympic lifting on day one. He's not going to walk for a week.
Yeah, horrible.
And a lot of people, So I think it's almost like, it's interesting the way you said that. I feel like they need the strength coach, the dietitian. And, there's a lot of great gyms. A lot of gyms will say military, police, hey, 50% off membership, whatever. You get a lot of discounts from that. But there almost needs to be like a program like, hey, like I work with golfers. I'm saying like, hey, I want to be the official force to be like, hey, you guys come in. Everybody's free we're going to do a group class on Monday nights or whatever, right?
Right.
There has to be this cultural change though within the force, not like going one by one. That's going to be too tough. It's got to be really it all stems from the top.
It is. And, it kind of comes down to that whole leadership piece. It's just, what do we want out of our police officers? And then what are we attracting to the profession right now? So, like long term, when I'm retired from the military, I love what I do. I definitely want to stay in. I just, retire from the military. That would be the dream, is to have that kind of impact on an academy somewhere in some larger city where it's, you can actually start where it's like, the model, like you train I'm sure you kind of train your golfers here and there, right? Starting out with that. Let's start with how to move properly, and then let's work towards all those other things. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, so once again, the book is called Answering the Call: Proper Physical Fitness Training for Police and Military in the 21st Century. There's so much stuff in here, guys, that, like specific stuff. We obviously not going to go over. We haven't gone over. I mean, there's warm-up examples. There is, the standards that he talks about. There's, with the military stuff, day-to-day fitness, different phases. There's the patrol cop. He put stuff in there for just the patrol. I know we've been kind of talking about cops, but there's a lot of other stuff in here that it gets pretty advanced. He has a psychological piece. Ranger school and SWAT build up. So there's a lot going on in this book. You did a great job with it. Anything else you kind of want to say, finishing up, just overview of some of the stuff you're trying to do?
Just generally speaking, if I had to say, the book, I think if you're a strength coach, I think the value that you kind of get from it, right, is that I was nothing special, just a graduate assistant, right?
Yep.
But, coming from that strength coach background and then becoming a cop and then actually doing the military thing and kind of having that weird path where I got to, do all the wrong things to hopefully help people not do those same mistakes as I kind of made my way through my career and everything. Those lessons learned that I don't think you can get from just your, when you're trying to train these groups. Like, we have strength coaches in the military now in some places. Some of them are, their first time jumping into these different things and trying to train military people. Depending on what level they're at and everything, I think it's very hard to get the perspective of someone who's still done the job and also understands how that could, like, how strength training and physical fitness fits into like the lifestyle. That I don't know anyone else who's written like I think you said, like, I the parts where it's for the police officer, it's written like I'm having a conversation with a cop, right? And you can't really, without doing the job for, I worked nights for like 3 years to try and, have a physical, to have that lifestyle where movement is medicine and everything else, and also fit it into the job. You're not going to have too many books like that where I'm like, look, this is a 4-week program, but don't sweat it if it's 6, because, you didn't sleep for 2 days straight, and family life plus police work plus all those things. Those kind of insights with those programs like you're just describing, I think is what's going to set this apart from other stuff.
Good stuff. Well, what an interesting story you have, Matt, and love what you're doing. Love like this. Love your mission, and I hope that you're successful with getting more officers, more into training, not just to get into academy, but to kind of maintain that. And so hopefully some of the things that you're doing are going to lead to some better physically and mentally and emotionally prepared officers and military personnel. So yeah. So thanks again for doing this, Matt.
Thank you very much.
All right, that's going to do it for episode 362 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Remember, the show notes are located at continuefit.com or strengthcoachpodcast.com. Don't forget, try out the new strengthcoach.com for 7 days for free. Check it all out at strengthcoach.com. Special thanks to Chris Party and the folks over at Perform Better. On sale right now, 50% off a bunch of stuff, including bumper plates, kettlebells, and dumbbells. Guys, last summit in Providence, August 25th to the 27th. Take advantage of the hotel discount. It ends August 4th. Got to get on it. Coach Boyle will be speaking there, as well as so many other top presenters and coaches. Check it all out at performbetter.com. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Matt Hibler for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength conditioning, performance enhancement, and technical training. Check out the anniversary issue I did with Coach Boyle, 40 Mistakes, 40 Years. There is a link to access that at strengthcoachpodcast.com. Thanks to Sumit Seth and Naamly, helping build relationships through personalized communication so your members stay longer and pay longer. Go to Naamly.com. Use the referral code StrengthCoach to get started on your free 30-day trial. Thanks to AG1 from Athletic Greens. Visit athleticgreens.com/StrengthCoach. Get your free supply of vitamin D, a 1-year supply of vitamin D, and 5 free travel packs today. That's going to do it for this episode. My name's Anthony Renna. Thanks for listening, and I'll speak to you next time.